Man, we're excited to be jumping into the final message of this series we've entitled Living Generously. And so, man, if you're taking notes this morning, I would encourage you, by the way, if you have not yet, download our church app. On the app is a great feature where you can take notes, fill in the blank, all right? And then you can save that as a note to your phone, right? And so that way you can gather back, you can go back tomorrow or whatever and be like, oh man, what did that idiot say again? Oh, Pastor Lance said. And the main idea for today is that living with awareness that leads to action will leave a lasting impact. All right? Living with awareness that leads to action will leave a lasting impact. And so as we conclude our series today about living generously, maybe you haven't been here the last few weeks, and that's okay. Let me give you a quick recap of what we've been talking about. The first 2 weeks, maybe here's just a highlight. We talked about what generosity is and how generosity is not just with our finances, but we can be generous with our thoughts. We can be generous with our words. We can be generous with our money. We can be generous with our influence, our time. We can be generous with our attention, and we can be generous with our belongings. Those are 7 different areas that we can be generous in. And so we talked about how generosity is about taking your entire life, right? Who you are and what you own, and saying, God, I want it to be used for your glory. All right, that's the heart of this series. And so week 1, we talked about those ways of being generous, and we talked about an awareness, praying for an awareness, saying, God, help me to be aware of the needs around me, that if someone needs my attention, may I be generous with that time. Right, putting down the phone and just being dialed into what they're saying. And then in week 2, we talked about how having a desire for generosity is great, but the Lord wants us to move from desire to living it out, to moving to action. All right, so we started with awareness, we moved to action, and then, of course, now that we have this way of action, right, God, we talked about it last week, that we just want to start small, right, and start small. And I have loved having a front row seat, and I love hearing the stories about how we started and the things that the Lord is doing and how he's using our generosity. And man, even last week, had a great conversation at the end of service. Service ends. You know, we talked last week, if you weren't here, out in the lobby area, there's 2 pallets and they have Christmas cards on them. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to collect $25 gift cards so that every teen in the foster care system, not just, we're talking about Summit County, and I get we're in Medina County, but there's already churches that have that, so we're shooting for Summit County. There's over 200. But that for the entire state of Ohio, right, that every teen in the foster care system would receive a Christmas gift from us, right? And so that's crazy generous. And so last year, I think we gave like 114, 116, something like that. And so we talked about having 200. Last week alone, over 200 Christmas cards were taken from Radiant Life Church to be returned. So that is phenomenal. That is awesome. And you're like, that seems like a lot. Well, hey, if our goal was 200, I say we exceed the goal. So if the Lord puts it on your heart to purchase one, please be in obedience and do that. But at the end of the service, a couple walks up to me, and they're holding a card, a singular card, and they said, hey, would it be possible, maybe a teen to fill out the card for us? And I was like, yeah, sure, we can do that. I'm thinking, it's a card, but yeah, if you want somebody else to fill it out for you, that's no problem. And then they paused, and they said, hey, let me be more specific. The reason I'm asking for teens is because we want to purchase 50 cards. And I was like, oh, that's next level. Like I in my heart, like I wanted to clap and I wanted to cry all at the same time. And I was like, yes. So teenagers, on Wednesday, bring your handwriting, okay? Because there are 50 cards that you're going to personally be able to write to one of your peers. Like check that out, to one of your peers to encourage them this Christmas. Right? And then those cards will go directly to them. And so, man, how awesome is that we get to see generosity, right, come alive in people's lives and to be able to share those stories. But this morning, we're talking about impact, right? We know that those gift cards are going to have an impact in somebody's life, in a teenager's life. But hear me on this. When we took up our offering last week for Stand Sunday, we raised $1,300 for vulnerable children. That's awesome, too. We should rejoice with that. But as you walked in this morning, maybe you saw our special guest at a table because we're talking about impact. And that impact is with those children who are vulnerable, who listen to me, they have names. They have names. They need love, they need cared for. And so this morning, Heather and her husband are in the back, and they would love to talk to you after service about foster care, about foster care system, about what you can do and the role that you can play in having an impact in another child's life. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're like, man, if I go talk, are they going to get my information? Like, am I signing up to take a child home today? No. Okay, you may not be doing that. It could be. Maybe the Lord puts it on your heart, and maybe you open up your home, and you're not sure how, and He creates an avenue, and that would be awesome. But maybe it's just being more aware that there are other opportunities. Maybe it's saying, man, I want to partner with a foster care family here in church. There are multiple families in the church that have foster care children in their home. And maybe it's just providing a meal. And I'm not saying just because, hear me, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once a month where you're like, hey, I want to partner with you. You've opened up your home. I want to partner with you and help you. And so you take a meal. But maybe you go a step further. Maybe it's respite care. Maybe you're like, man, I want to be available to whoever would need some respite care. Respite being, hey, these children are placed, and in order to not take them, but watch them, you have to have the training. You have to go through all the background checks and all the screening. And maybe you walk through that. And so maybe it's once a month where on the weekend there are children in your home, and that foster care family just has a moment to breathe. Just a moment to breathe. And so you can play a part, right, that has lasting impact from generation to generation. So I would encourage you to stop by that table on the way out. Just chat, and maybe the Lord puts on your heart maybe something you can do, because that's what we're talking about, is having an impact, right? Awareness, action, and now impact. I don't know what comes to your mind when you think of the word impact. Like the first thing that comes to my mind is like, and you have, like playing baseball, and you see outfielders running for the ball, and they're not calling it, and all of a sudden, bam, like smack. Right, and they collide, and they have this big impact. I think maybe you think of MMA fighting, right? So you watch an MMA. I watch these videos, and they slow it down, and it's like, right, and they're on the ground. I'm not saying I like watching people get punished. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like you see this impact and its force, and it's like, right, car crashes. You're like, man, that was big impact. Or maybe it's like, because it's the season. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever fallen on ice because you didn't see it? Right? How many know that your backside feels an impact? Right? When you fall on ice. But maybe you're like me, so I've done that before where I've tripped and I've fallen and I'm in a lot of pain, but I get up and I brush myself off, and the first thing I look for, did anybody see me? Listen, I'm good with the pain. I just don't want to be in shame of someone who's got me on video and I become TikTok famous. Like, that's my pastor. Right? Like, I'm not trying to do that. So I don't know what you think of an impact, but I would say probably the thing that really comes to my mind is football. And so maybe you've seen some of these hits, but this is what impact looks like to me. Check out this.
Here comes the ready or not. Here comes the boys from the south. Here comes the ready or not. How you like me now? I say, here comes the ready or not. Here comes the boys from the south. Here comes the ready or not. How you like me now? Is that all you got? I'll take your best shot. Is that all you got? I'll take your best shot. Is that all you got? I'll take your best shot. I'll take your best shot. I'll take your best shot. Is that all you got? Well, it's alright. It's alright. I'll take your best shot. Is that all you got? Well, it's alright. It's alright. I'll take your best shot. Is that all you got? I'll take your best shot. Take your best shot. Take your best shot. Is that all you got? I'll take your best shot. Take your best shot. Take your best shot. Here comes the blue. Ready or not. How you like me now?
I don't know. So maybe you think of impact like that. Mad props to Pastor Matt for putting that video together and adding a little POD behind it. I was like, I ain't heard that song in a while, so I was jamming to that. I don't know if you've caught it in the video, though. There were two teams that had cheap shots, and they were both from the same team, wearing black and yellow, bunch of cheaters, okay? That's all I got out of that video, is that team cheats. That's the way they win, is they cheat. Yep, that's how it is. Now, that could be the reason why the Browns keep losing, because we're not cheating. But maybe we should try that method today. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll go from there. But isn't that what we think? We think of impacts. We think of two objects colliding together, right? Force. And we're like, that's what impact is. But there's another definition of impact, and I want to share it with you this morning. It's this: having a strong effect on someone or something, right? Having a strong effect on someone or something. For example, maybe you've had the privilege of going and seeing the ocean, and you sit and you're on the beach and you're looking out and the waves are crashing over. And you see these waves and it's a force. There's impact that's happening. But another impact that you can't see would be the energy that's moving through the water that's creating the impact out in the seas that allow the oceans to roar so that the waves do crash over and make an impact. Or maybe you're like, I've never been to the ocean. Well, any body of water could actually work, whether it's a pond, a lake, right? You grab a stone and you throw it in, and what happens? There's impact. But there's something that goes beyond that impact, because then there's a ripple. And that ripple begins to go, and it moves from the place of impact to the rest of the body of water. And so that's what we're talking about this morning. We're talking about having this impact, because understand something, it's not exclusive to sports. It's not exclusive to a body of water. It's humanity. It's us being able to have this same type of ability to create this impact, because we have to understand there's an impact we cannot see that is creating the impact we can see. There's an impact that we cannot see that is creating the impact that we can see, and it's happening all around us. Here, let me show you that. Let me show you how this works. By a show of hands, so if this is you, if you have ever had somebody impact your life, raise your hand. So look around the room. Don't put your hand down yet. Look around. Everybody's got their hand up, which means at some point in your life, somebody has impacted your life. You're like, yeah, so that's what you're talking about, Pastor Lance, like we have an impact and we can see it. But here's the thing. You may not have seen the impact that somebody else had in that person's life, right? So somebody impacted you, but who impacted them? Do you see the effect? So there was someone that came along that loved that person, and then now all of a sudden they're loving you, and now they have an impact. And you may never have known that generation upon generation, 5 generations ago, somebody modeled that. And now you're receiving that same blessing, that same impact, that same ripple effect, because somebody loves you in that way or has an impact in your life. So it's not just the waves of the ocean that make this point of impact. It's not just when you drop something in the water that gives this ripple. This is a part of human history. You think back to the beginning of time, creation, where God said, man, I want someone else to be a part of this story. I want humanity to be created. And he created humanity, and he breathed life into humanity. And ever since that moment, there's been impact. There's been a ripple effect. Because impact is how the gospel and generosity spreads. Did you hear me? Impact is how the gospel and generosity spreads. Let me share it to you like this. Every year we do a missions conference. So coming up in January, we'll have a missions conference. We make pledges above and beyond for our giving, where we support missionaries all over the world, here in the U.S. and even locally. And we're like, man, we want them on the mission field spreading the gospel. And then we do what's called a special missions project. So this year, our special missions project is in Guatemala, and we're raising funds to be able to build a school, church, and parsonage. Just one building that will house all 3. Right? And those missionaries were here, and they shared, and man, what's going to happen and how God's going to use this school to transform really, truly an entire city, and then hopefully a country through your generosity. Well, a number of years ago, we had missionaries here who serve in the country of Laos, and they work at a life center. And at that life center, there was a plan they wanted to build on. They were maxed to capacity. Now understand what takes place at this life center. This life center brings in girls from that country. They provide meals daily. They provide an education that they would not typically get in the public setting, and that's all paid for. They receive uniforms, they receive the meals, and they receive the housing. Because what happens in that country when children do not have that opportunity is many times they're sold into sex trafficking. So over the last number of years, because of your generosity, they're able to build and to expand that life center and provide more space. That more space provides an opportunity for other young children to receive that education and to receive those meals. And then they most of them stay in the country of Laos, and they begin spreading that same hope and that same love that they received. And so that's that ripple effect, that your generosity has had an impact in other countries. And you're like, I've never been to Laos. You don't have to. Maybe God would call you there, but you can have that impact because of your generosity. And so we see that it's tangible. That impact is how the gospel and generosity spreads. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, maybe digitally, it'll be on the screen, but you can turn to the book of Acts, and we're going to be looking at the early church. So we're going to be in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 46. And we're going to see impact. You want to see a church that had their act together, right? The early church, the first church, man, they were on it, and they were like wildfire. You're going to hear this biblical account and how important it is for us to see what an impact they've had on us. It says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Wouldn't that be great to have that kind of unity today, right? They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Now, we talked about on the front end of the service how important life groups are. Do you see what they're doing? They met together. They broke bread, so they had food, which this month is breakfast foods, I believe. Doesn't get any better than that. Who doesn't want breakfast for dinner? Hello. And so there's breaking of bread, and at the end of every life group, there's prayer, and in the middle of the life group, there's the word. So what are we doing? We're being the New Testament church, right? Meeting in homes and gathering and praying and living in community. And so it's so important for us to see that, to recognize it. But to understand the context of what's taking place in this early church, you have to know what takes place before this church began. So in the New Testament, the first 4 books of the New Testament, it's the Gospels, the life of Jesus. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so it's this where we hear of Jesus' story. We catch and understand that he's going to come. He's telling his disciples, these apostles, right? My death is imminent, and what I'm going to do is for the whole world, and I need you to remember this, and one day I'm going to use you, and the heart of this is to have reconciliation back to the Father, because of what sin has done, there's a gap, there's a chasm, and you can't make your way to the other side, but I will provide the sacrifice so you can. And so what did they have an opportunity? They had a front row seat to experience Jesus, to see Jesus, to witness him and walk with him, and to experience his death and his resurrection. And then once you get out of the Gospels, you get to the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 1, Jesus is ascending to heaven. And he's saying, listen, I'm going to send the Holy Spirit. And then what I want you to do, and he gives a challenge, I want you to go have impact. The impact that I've had in your life, I want you to go have that in others. And I want you to be witnesses in Judea and Samaria to the other ends of the earth. I want you to have this kind of impact because of what I've been able to do. He's saying, listen, followers, you're going to have this impact because of the impact that I've had on you. Jesus is creating this ripple effect. He's saying, man, this is the drop in the water, and now it's going to continue to expand, and it's going to move from this territory in this region, and it's going to have an impact across the globe. And he says, I'm going to send the Holy Spirit. Now, I would dive more typically into, man, what is the power of the Holy Spirit? But in 2 weeks, we're kicking off a brand new series and around the Holy Spirit. And so I don't want to share it all now, so I'll share it then. But just know that this is what's taking place. So now you get to Acts chapter 2. And then we read here, it's like, man, this church is giving of themselves, possessions into the poor. They're worshiping together. They're enduring and facing persecution. And this isn't just a standalone event. We're seeing their impact because of the finished work of Christ. And that's where we get to in chapter 2. And I love how it says, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. And you read that and you're like, man, that's awesome. Wow. Like, man, every day, God's goodness and his mercy and his grace is more than enough. And people are finding and following after him. And this is awesome. But what we realize is the ripple effect. They are responding because of the impact that Jesus has already, the mark, right, that he's already marked, the stamp that he's already given to them with the Holy Spirit. Now they're having this kind of impact because of what they've experienced. Now they're having to share it with others. Man, how would they be this generous, right? They sold everything, their property, their possessions, and if there was someone in need, right, they were like, hey, man, because you don't have, we want you to have. Where was this modeled? How did they see this? Do you think because they walked with Jesus? Do you think because they had a front row seat to his sacrificial love? Like they were there in row A, seat 1 and 2, like, man, we got this. We're in the front row, and Jesus, I saw, I was able to watch you from afar. I was up close and personal, and I watched the way that you live. And then when you said that this temple, right, was going to be destroyed, but 3 days later, I didn't grasp it then, but I grasp it now. And I see your sacrificial love and the sacrifice that you made on the cross of Calvary for me. And because my only proper response because of that is to love the way you loved me. And because you modeled generosity. See, Jesus didn't just give part of himself, he gave all of himself. He loved with everything he had. And so they have this model, and now you see this ripple effect with the early church. And we have that same ability, right, to have that same kind of impact because it's still happening. Thousands of years later, he's still using the local church to have an impact in the world. You see it happening. And so now we have that same ability. One day he's going to come back, and he's going to come back for his church. And my question would be is what kind of impact do we want to have before he returns? What's that legacy? What's that impact? And I love this heart of generosity because Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 7. He says, see that you also grow in the grace of giving. Right? In the grace of giving. So don't miss this important truth. It's that generosity inspires generosity. Generosity inspires generosity. The generous life is extremely contagious. Right? Think about it from the context of what's like colds. Think of the common cold. Right? You sneeze, and next thing you know, everybody else around you gets a cold. Right? Like Pastor Anthony and Katie, their house, they've been sharing. Sharing is caring. Like your kids love to share their germs with you. And then you get it, and then you share it with your spouse because we just love each other that much. But that's how contagious our generosity is. That it can spread, that it can have that kind of impact. So you become more aware. You see things differently. You see people the way that God sees them. And then because you're more aware, you want to be moved to action. And you're like, man, I see a need, I want to meet a need. I want to be able to speak life. It seems like this person's down. Right? Every day, are we aware that God wants to use us for his mission? Maybe it's just a word of encouragement today. Maybe someone's hurting. It could be someone in this room. It could be someone watching online. Maybe somebody today just needs a word of encouragement. Maybe they showed up and they're like, man, this is my last ditch effort. I never thought I'd try church. I don't really like church, but I'm here. And maybe they just need a word of encouragement. If the Lord would tell you to go talk to somebody and go talk to them, you're like, no, I can't do that. How hard is it to say yes? But you don't know what's on the other side of your yes. So be willing to say yes that you could see this type of generosity and the impact that it could have. So throughout this series, I've given you one challenge every week. Like, hey, man, we want to be aware. What do? Pray every day. God, help me to be more aware. Last week, man, we want to move to action. How are we move to action? Start small. This week, man, I want to have an impact. What should we do? I think we need to celebrate the generosity within each other. Now, when I say that, I want you to just know, I'm not saying in a prideful, arrogant, like, look at me. Like, look what I've done. Like, I don't need you to say, oh, man, I'm gonna come forward with my gift cards next week, and I'm going to put them on the altar like, look at me, look what I did. No. But with humility, I think we do need to celebrate. I think we need to celebrate what God is doing and in the impact that generosity is having. You see, the end goal of our generosity should always be for other people to see God for who he truly is. It's not about us, right? It's not about us receiving the credit. It's about God. What do you want me to do? So before we close, I just want to share with you just 2 quick stories. That's it. That's how we're going to end the service, how we're going to end this series about living generous and about how your life, your generosity can have an impact far beyond your reach. So this week, just last week, Pastor Angel and I were driving back. We were in Columbus, and we were coming back home. And we were talking about all the great things that's happening with our other campus, right? We're one church in multiple locations. Rosemary Community Dinner every Thursday is our campus, right, in East Akron. And, man, what a great job Pastor Anthony and Katie are doing in that location. And, man, just meeting needs, loving people, providing meals. Like, it's phenomenal. If you've never had an opportunity to serve, right, I would encourage you to find Pastor Anthony and say, hey, I just want to, maybe just once, because I think it will have that kind of impact in your life. But we were talking, and every campus is different. Every location is different. And so we were just talking through the offerings at Rosemary Community Dinner. And we do take one every week, but it's not going to be an offering that pays the bills, right? You're like, okay, well, this is an easier one to count, but it's still having an impact. And so we're like, man, like it costs money. We have rent. We provide the meals every week and the utensils to eat with. Like this is there's money. So when do we see this campus like being able to sustain itself and be on its own? And I'm not sure when. We were just hey, what would that take? 2 days later, everybody say 2 days. 2 days later, we get this text message. It begins a phone call, and we start having this conversation. And there is a family that has a heart of generosity, and they said, hey man, we want to be able to give, and is there an opportunity, and where do you think that would be best to be used at? And we're like, man, Rosemary. And so they're like, okay, and so they make this donation, and sure enough, this donation is enough, and I want you to see this on the screen, it's crazy. The donation is enough to cover rent and food for the entire year. Let's go. So we have a conversation. 2 days later, a donation comes in, and so it's going to cover rent and food. But here's what that equates, because I think sometimes we miss it. Like, hey, it's one act of generosity, and that's awesome, and it'll be great, and you'll use it, and it'll be wonderful, and it's good. But it has impact. That family's generosity will lead to 2,500 hot meals being served. Not one, not two, but 2,500 hot meals. Not only that, the gospel will be heard over 3,000 times during 2023. So what that is like picking up a rock and throwing it in the water and watching the ripple effect, but it reaches the shore. And it reaches far beyond what we ever thought. But that's what happens when we say yes. That's what's available to us when we have this heart of generosity. And it just continues to go and to go. And so one person and one family's generosity has a yearly impact. Hear me on this, church. We don't just need money to live on, we need something to live for. Right? We just don't need money to live on. We need something to live for, something beyond our reach, something beyond our grasp. Right? And for whatever reason, the Christmas season brings out that, like, man, I want to be generous, and I love it. Because we're gonna collect, I know it. I know we're gonna collect well over 200 gift cards, and every teen in Summit County will receive a gift with a card that says, I believe in you. I love you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Like, it's so powerful. Right? Pastor Angel, like, man, 414 people will eat Thanksgiving meals because of your generosity. That is awesome. Impact beyond. But that's what happens when we go from awareness to action, and then we have an opportunity to see the impact. As we conclude this series, I want you to know that your impact has such significant that it just doesn't have an impact with you, it has an impact on others. And it's our generosity that can create a legacy. You see, the dictionary defines a legacy as something that's handed down from the past to the next generation, right? So it goes from generation to generation. So I want you to see this picture of what happened last Sunday. Last Sunday, Pastor Kim, our kids pastor, put out this challenge to all the kids, like, hey, I want you to bring in coins. And so they brought them in their socks. I did ask, did they wash those socks before they brought them in? I'm just asking for a friend. And so they bring in these socks, and so these children, and so what they did is they brought their coins in and they put them on a scale. So individually, what they brought in, and then they add that up and they get the sum of the amount of pounds of coins that were brought in by children last week. So last week, those kids brought in 54 pounds of coins to give to our missions and to our special missions project. Isn't that awesome? But here's what I love. It's like you see some socks, you got Chloe in the center there, and she's got a hand underneath her sock because that was like Andre the Giant's sock, and that sucker was jammed full of coins. Like, she couldn't even carry it. She's like, oh my goodness. And I think it was our food scale. I think she may have broke it. Like, it's not used to hold it. Like, but here's what I know about all those children on that screen. Is that's been modeled for them, this generosity. They see it in their parents. They see it in others. And they go, man, that's a legacy. I've seen that. I know what that feels like. And man, if parents can do that, and adults can do that, and my grandparents can give sacrificially, then I want to as well. And that's the impact and the legacy that we can leave behind. And so I love that our legacy, our generosity isn't just for us. It's not just for the person we're giving it to, but it has an impact far beyond our reach. And it becomes contagious. And other people see that and they're like, man, I don't know what's wrong with you people. Right? Why are you so generous? Like when I have conversations, I love it. Teenagers, trust me. I love you guys. And here's what I love is that we were even at Canes the other day when we were at Reach Conference. And this lady comes up and she was in Pittsburgh Penguins gear. And I was like, I'm judging you, but I'm not. And so she comes up and we were in there and she goes, can I just tell you, that group of teens, because the adults were sitting together, that group of teens is so well behaved. Thank you. And I was like, yeah, you guys are awesome. Well behaved. Yeah. But see, it's because there's people, there's parents that pour into, there's adult leaders that pour into, and then it has this impact that's changing the world. So I didn't share this the first service, but I'll share it the second service. So our teenagers, they were crazy. They're crazy, okay? Some of them are, you're well behaved, but y'all crazy, okay? And so they had a challenge because they give the missions as well. It's not just the adults, it's not just the kids, but our teenagers. And so they set out for some crazy goal, and they wanted to raise $10,000 to give to Speed the Light, which is absolutely crazy. And so they had this goal, and man, they're gonna go after it. And so this week they're like, man, we need to raise another $1,100. And they're giving sacrificially. And I know, like, the Lord sees it. He sees your sacrifice. So what we see is we see our teens, we see our kids, we see us as adults that are being impacted. And there's a legacy that's being created. And they get the heart of the missions as kids and teens, and as adults you continue to give. So here's how we're gonna end. And my question is this, is what is the most important legacy you can leave behind? What's the most important legacy you can leave behind? I was having a conversation with someone just the other day, and about retirement, because I said something about my 401k and the negative sign this year. And I said, I don't know. My goal is, like, if I'm 65, I'd like to be able to retire. We'll see Social Security, if it's still there, and how much money I can get, you know. And I said, here's the crazy thing. That's 18 years from now. I was like, 18 years? I was like, it may seem like eternity, but it seems short. And I was like, what kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? Right? What do I want people to say about me when I'm gone? And then it hit me. Like, it hit me because everyone was asking me this, Pastor Angel and I this weekend, like, hey, what's it like? I know you had about 10 to 15 days that you went from having 3 kids in your home to 1. And I was like, I don't like it. I'm sure it'll be great one day. Right? The empty nest, I'm sure it'll be great one day. But right now, right? We'll make sure none of your children hear that. No, I'm just kidding. But it hit me in that moment that I went, oh, what legacy do I want to leave behind? And then I was so grateful. Like, the emotions, like I kind of teared up, and I was like, I'm so grateful that when I'm like, it's time for me, like, to step aside, that there's another generation, there's a group of teenagers, right? My children who are man, going after Jesus. Like, Olivia, the youngest, she's like, man, I feel called, and I'm gonna change the world, Dad. I was like, I think you will. Like, she's gonna preach all over the world. Okay, I think he's gonna use you. Breezer, his kids pastor, on staff with us as worship pastor. Just saw Kirsten this past week, and they brought her to Ohio. She's trying to get everybody to go to college with her. That was her goal, and I think she's gonna succeed. But I was like, oh, the legacy will live on. In spite of me, or despite me, my children turned out okay. I give all the credit to their mother. That's what I do there. That's true, it is. If you know us, that's absolutely 100% true. But it's about the legacy, the impact that you want to leave behind. The generosity of your heart with your words, your thoughts, your attention, with your belongings, with your finances. Are you saying, follow me as I follow Christ? And I want you to see the generosity that comes. Because I'm letting you know right now, it's an impact that will far outlive you. It will far outlive you. So here's how we're going to close service. I'm going to pray with you. And if you're like, man, that's me. I want to be a generous person of my time, of my talents, of my treasures. If that's you, would you just raise your hands and let's close in prayer. Father, this morning, I'm grateful that we can be people of generosity, that we can live a life of generosity. We can be generous with our words, and we can encourage others. We can be generous with our attention and stay focused in just having conversation with people. God, even today as we leave, maybe there is a tugging for the vulnerable children of this world, and you would use Heather and others to speak into our life. God, may we be open to receive from you. So God, help us to be aware of the needs around us, that you would call us to action. And if we are privileged enough, allow us to see the impact that we can have for you and your glory, because we don't want it to be about us. Because always we want to live our best day where we're pointing people to you. So use us, Jesus, in your precious and mighty name. Amen and amen.